Hello everyone, I'm Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and money color commentator. On today's show, Risk and Reward, part 5 in our series on Understanding Asset Allocation. Well, welcome to our fourth segment. We're talking about now risk and return. Oh my gosh, here's the real war zone that we could have, and we'll try to define it as simply as we can so that you understand what you're getting yourself into. I've talked every day in this week about risk tolerance test. It's not a science, but it's a good place to start. You need to take a test, you and your spouse, separately from each other so that you don't cheat, you don't look at everybody's answers, to get a good, true idea of where you both fall out and then figure out where your commonalities are. Now, I'm thinking about this when I'm trying to go ahead and weigh risk and return. I want to look at this gentleman called Harry Markowitz in 1950. He won the Nobel Prize. How did he do that? The concept of asset allocation, by measuring the risk posed by different types of securities and creating a portfolio investment on low or negative correlations. This is all his basis we do today. Much of what we do, even the math today, the modeling today, is still rooted in Harry's thinking. So when we're looking at this, we're going to be looking at correlation, asset classes as we looked before, and return and risk. I want to tell you about this because this is really a heartthrob of a question. I had a young man and his wife. He was 37, she was 35. I showed him the Ibbotson chart of the performance of the stock market. And of course, you've seen the mountain chart. It keeps going up. I told him that long haul, because he's probably not going to retire till he's 70, he should think about his 401k and a little bit more moderate to maybe moderate aggressive growth. But I said, but before we even talk about that, I'd like you to do a test. They did their test and they emailed it to me, and I looked at both their tests and they were seriously conservative. So I went back to them. I said, you realize that you have a huge time horizon here and that you can afford the ups and downs in the market, which we predict should be, according to what's happened in the past. I can't say it's indication of the future, but basically this looks like, I don't see a paradigm changing yet in the financial market. This is what you probably will be okay if you're a long-term investor. They still said they objected because they didn't have the psychonomics or the risk tolerance for hardly any risk. I had to put them in things that they wanted to be placed in, barely matching inflation or barely beating it. But that's their propensity. They cannot find comfort at night. They cannot find sleep in when they go to bed at night because they're worrying about the next 2008 market crash. Now, I'm not their psychological guru. I can't help them in this regard. Psychonomics are psychonomics. I showed my long haul thinking. I showed them the market performance. But at the end of the day, your risk tolerance needs to make the judgment, the final call. Even though I might think it's a little irrational, I think it's a little too conservative. Remember, my clients have to live with their money gains or losses. I don't. So it's very important to make sure that you do a risk tolerance test and you're true to yourself. Now, I'm looking at what's predictable is change. I know it's always going to change. I talked last segment, some of the winners of last year may not be the winners of this year. So be cautious. If you're a trend kind of a person and you're always then going to be behind the trend. The trend's already occurred. It's already happening. The market's actually moved on already. So you want to do something a little bit more, what I would call disciplined. Most people that are in 401ks are putting money in every 2 weeks. You already are doing a form of dollar cost averaging. Dollar cost averaging is putting the same amount every month into whatever assets you've chosen or your advisor's chosen with your help and your collaboration. And every time you're putting money in, you're making, it could be high, you're buying low, depending upon the market. So if the market goes down, you're buying more shares of that. If the market goes up, you're buying less shares of that. But you're buying in a disciplined format every month. And when I was in my 401k, I just saw it go into those asset allocation models. I looked at it once a year, did some rebalancing, and then again walked away from it again for another year, and always putting in say every 2 weeks it was coming out of my check, it's going into my 401k. And the reason I liked it was because my actual employer was matching up to 6% of my contribution. Huge issue. So I want to be able to do that. But I want to be able to do a disciplined way. I don't know when stocks are going to be up and bonds down. I don't want to know when bonds are going to be up or stocks down. I don't know when small caps will beat large caps or large caps will beat small caps. I don't know. So I try to have a diversified portfolio. I try to have different asset classes represented so that I can go ahead and get pretty much the mean of the market. I'm not trying to get the top end. I certainly don't want to get the low end. I'm trying to go in between, and dollar cost averaging for most people is pretty much the way to go. Now, you remember, the market can be volatile. And I mean, how volatile? You could lose your money. And by the way, I love how people talk about the market. Could you lose all your money? Yes, you could. So I'd rather just say the most, it sounds insane, it sounds a little bit overreactive and extreme, but I'd rather just tell a client, listen, when you're in the market beware, right? You could lose your money, right? All of it. Some people lost 40% and they thought that was bad. But you could have a bad time. I mean, in the 1928s, I mean, the market crashed. People lost almost all their money. So I'm just trying to encourage you, understand what you're getting, buyer beware, and just understand the market and understand where you are in your timeline. As we get closer, I have a lot of my friends, my baby boomers, hey, we're starting to pull back. We're not as aggressive. We're not as much as securities. Right now, I'm sitting at 20% because of my age and because of when I'm retiring. I'm at 20% in securities. The rest of it's in fixed annuities, fixed instruments. Why? Because I'm conservative. I'm close to my retirement. I can't take a hit. Think about this. The boomers, we went through the 1987 crash. We went through the 2001, 2, and 3 bubble. We went through the dot-com bubble, and we went through the 2008. We can't afford another hit, and I feel bad for some of our Generation X and Ys who actually entered the workforce in 2001 and immediately took 3 straight years of losses, then took another loss in 2008. I mean, think about this. Talk about the lost decade. How would you like to enter the work market and your money that you've given to your portfolio, if it wasn't for the employer match, you'd have a negative return. And even with some market match from your employer, it still didn't make it. So I want to always look at volatility. It's going to play. You have to understand it. I saw the market go down when President Trump was elected, the night of election night. I think it went down 600 and something points. Everybody was running to go to their broker to say, hey, get me out of here. I think this is going to be disaster. But what it did was once they cleaned out the fear-mongering, the market started going up. And since then, since president for 1 year now, think about it. The market has been on a tear, probably the greatest tear of all time in recent modern history. I'm going to say modern history for me is probably since 1990 up. Now, when I'm looking at it, I want to look at what's my standard deviation. You know, have you ever seen a bell curve, of course? And in the middle, this is my standard return. I'm thinking this is the number I want. If I get better than that, that's going to be a positive deviation. Hey, it's actually, as I get farther away, the odds of me getting a 10, a 12, a 14% are going to be remote because, you know, it takes a lot more pressure and a lot more return and a lot more profitability in the market to score those numbers. But on the other side, too, on the other side of the bell curve, I might have exposure. So I might have 4% of my principal, 8% of my principal, 12% of my principal, I could lose. I want to start measuring my volatility. The longer my timeline is, the more I'm willing to accept some volatility as long as my risk tolerance test shows that my psychonomics or my psychological profile has a disposition for risk at that time signature. So time, risk tolerance, what are my goals? Why would I risk 10-15% of my money principal for a 10-15% return? Do you get that? It's 1 for 1. Why would I do that? So I want to be a little more conservative in my thinking as I'm a baby boomer. But now, a millennial, hey, I have 30, 40 years to go. I'm going to be a little bit more soft to taking risks because I have time in my hand. Volatility, up or down, I never know when any of these 4 markets are going to be the king or the winner. But they are somewhat correlated, kind of a teeter-totter effect. And it's a rule of thumb, it certainly isn't science, to say that stocks are up, bonds are probably not in favor, they're down. Stock market's got a problem, bonds all of a sudden become king. Everybody wants the kind of safety and return, even though they're maybe not the return they want in equities, but it's better than losing your money over here. I don't know if small caps are going to defeat large caps or large caps, small caps. That's why I like to do dollar cost averaging. That's why I like to be good, disciplined investor and try to get to my investment goals, stick to my portfolio, rebalance it every year if I have to, and sit down with a financial advisor who's a professional in the market and understands the ups and downs of the market and the volatility. Sometimes I need a pastoral touch for an advisor to hold my hand during difficult times. I remember in 2015, the last 6 months of the year, or actually probably the last 5 months of the year, There was troubling times, and the market was really having problems. So people had to sit there and say, should I sell out? Is this going to be a prolonged loss? Is this a correction? Is this a bear market? Sometimes you need somebody else to walk you through it who has a more 30,000-foot view and is dispassionate. He's disconnected himself from it so that he can actually give you wisdom and walk you by. Remember, these things, we don't know what the market will do. We're just trying to do our best doing asset allocation to mitigate the losses in a market. Don't forget to watch our next segment on diversity to mitigate adversity, part 5 in our series on understanding asset allocation. And keep in mind, before moving forward with any of the ideas on our show, always check with your tax consultant, legal counsel, or financial advisor. You've been watching Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game.